I was 24, freshly out of school and trying to figure out how to be a functional adult, which mostly meant having a steady job and not living with my parents. I'd landed a position doing data entry for a small insurance firm, mind-numbingly boring, but it paid the bills. To try and sort through the general aimlessness, I started seeing a therapist a couple of times a month. Her office was in this really unremarkable little building, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bakery, and honestly, it felt like a normal part of the routine. The sessions with Alma were comfortable, not exactly enjoyable. Unpacking everything always felt a bit raw, but comfortable, predictable, mostly. We'd talk about work, the new project with Hal, mostly how I was second-guessing every decision. She'd nod, offer some phrasing about imposter syndrome, and then steer me back to childhood, standard stuff. I remember one Tuesday, though. Everything smelled faintly of cinnamon, not like a bakery, more dusty cinnamon, like someone had spilled it ages ago and it permeated the air. I mentioned it to Alma, thinking maybe she burned a candle or something. She looked genuinely puzzled. Cinnamon? No, I haven't. That's odd. Are you sure? I was sure it wasn't overpowering, just present. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was coming from the coffee shop downstairs, or someone in the hallway had a cinnamon-scented hand lotion. It was a weird thing to focus on, honestly. Then, a couple of sessions later, it was back, stronger this time, and I noticed something else, a flicker. Not with the lights, but in my peripheral vision, like someone was moving just outside the doorway. I'd turn my head, and nothing. Alma didn't seem to notice anything. I started to feel a little silly. Honestly, I was stressed, sleep-deprived, probably just imagining things. I mentioned to Winnie at reception that I'd been getting a bit jumpy lately. She gave me this tight little smile and said, "Oh, this building does have a bit of an atmosphere, doesn't it?" It wasn't an atmosphere, it was a smell, and those flickers. I started taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Just in case, it felt safer, like avoiding a blind spot. The stairs were different, not structurally, but the landings. I'd always just rushed up them, phone in hand, thinking about work, but now I was looking, and on the second landing, tucked into the alcove by the window, was a small porcelain doll, just sitting there. It wasn't mine. I wouldn't have a doll. It was old-fashioned, one of those with painted eyes and a frilly dress. Dusty. I went back down and checked the lobby. Winnie wasn't at the desk, but I scanned anyway. No one carrying a doll. I went back up, and it was still there. I took a picture, mostly to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. That cinnamon smell was faint, but definitely there on that landing. After that, I started checking everything. The elevator buttons, the handrails, even the little potted plant in the lobby. Looking for what? I don't know. Something out of place, something that didn't belong. I started parking further away from the building just to see if anything felt different approaching from another direction. One afternoon, I realized the bakery next door had changed their window display. Not the pastries, but the little decorations. They'd added a string of those fairy lights, the warm white ones. I remembered distinctly thinking they hadn't been there last week. It sounds stupid, but it felt intentional, like someone was deliberately altering things, small things around me. Then, yesterday, I saw her. Selma, from accounting on the 5th floor. She was leaving the building just as I was coming out, and she smiled. Not a friendly, passing in the hall smile. It was a knowing smile, and she was carrying a small, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. The same shade as the paper the doll's dress seemed to be made of. It was probably nothing. Selma probably just had a gift for someone. But she looked right at me, and that smile, it felt like she was confirming something, like she knew I'd seen the doll, like she knew I was starting to notice. I think she's watching me. I skipped my therapy appointment today. Just couldn't. It wasn't even a conscious decision, not at first. I just found myself walking in the opposite direction when I got to the building, and then I remembered Winnie hadn't been at the front desk for 3 days. That's what I told myself anyway. That I was avoiding Dr. Alma because I was worried about Winnie. It felt better than admitting I was scared of Alma, or scared of what Alma was doing. I went to grab a coffee at that little bakery around the corner, the one with the rotating display of pastries, except it wasn't rotating today. And the display wasn't pastries, it was dolls, porcelain dolls, all different sizes, all dressed in variations of that brown paper fabric. It was like someone had emptied out a Victorian attic into their window. I almost turned around. I really did. But I needed coffee. I needed something normal. Then I heard it. A sound from the stairwell. Not footsteps, not exactly. More like dragging. A slow, deliberate scrape against the concrete. It was coming from the third-floor landing, the one where I saw the doll. I froze. I told myself it was maintenance, someone moving equipment, but the sound stopped, and then a cough. A dry, rattling cough, right above me. I couldn't see anything. I pressed myself against the bakery window, heart hammering, trying to blend in with the display of dolls. Then a voice, barely a whisper, so close it felt like someone was breathing on my neck. "She likes the fabric, you know." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. It was gone almost as quickly as it came. I bolted, practically tripping over myself, and ran straight out the door. I didn't look back. I'm almost certain it was Selma. She's been acting strange, and she was the one with the package. She must be involved with whoever is doing this. It's a prank, right? A really messed up, elaborate prank. It has to be. I called the police. Not about Selma directly. Not yet. I told them about the sounds, the feeling of being watched in the building. I didn't mention the dolls that felt too ridiculous, even to me. They sent a patrol car, 2 officers, young guys. They walked through the therapy center with me, looking around. It smelled like lemon cleaner and something stale, like old carpet. They didn't hear anything. Of course they didn't. "Everything seems secure, ma'am," one of them said, shining a flashlight under a desk. "No signs of forced entry." I pointed out Dr. Alma's office, the one where I'd heard the whispering. They checked the windows, the door. Nothing. They asked about Selma. I told them she'd been acting oddly, delivering packages, just being around. They took her name down, said they'd keep an eye out. It felt useless. Then they went into the bakery. That's when things got weird. The owner, Dora, was there, looking flustered. The police asked about any disturbances, any strange occurrences. Dora said she'd found something in the back, an old ledger. It wasn't hers. It was a patient list. From the 1950s and 1960s. The therapy center used to be a boarding house, apparently a really old one. Dora said the names in the ledger matched some headstones in the cemetery on the other side of town. They showed me the ledger. Names I didn't recognize. Dates from the 1950s, 1960s, and then right there in faded ink, a name, Helen. My grandmother. She'd been a patient here generations ago. It explained the feeling of recognition, the unsettling familiarity. It wasn't Selma. It wasn't a prank. It was something tied to my family, something buried in the history of this place. Maybe it was a genetic predisposition to what? Madness. I felt a little relieved, honestly. It had a cause, a root. I could understand it. That's what I told myself anyway. I felt like I was finally getting somewhere. I didn't tell them about the whispers. Or the dolls. The police were polite. They took notes and asked a lot of questions about Selma, about the sounds, and about what I remembered from childhood visits to my grandmother. They didn't dismiss anything exactly, but they didn't seem particularly concerned either. It felt like they were just cataloging. After 1 week, they closed the case, citing lack of evidence. They said the sounds were probably just the building settling, old pipes. That's what they said. It felt dismissive, but then again, maybe it was just the building. Old houses do that, right? I stopped going to Alma not because of anything she said. It was more the way she listened, or didn't. She'd ask about a memory and then subtly rephrase my answer back to me, almost as a question. "So, you think you saw the doll there? Or could it have been somewhere else?" Little things, enough to make me doubt myself. I started keeping a journal just to keep track, to have something concrete, but even that felt unreliable. Now, I check the locks every time. Not just the door lock, but the window locks too. I didn't used to do that. I mean, I lived alone, but I never felt exposed like this before. It started with hotels after a conference. I'd get into the room and immediately check behind the curtains, under the bed, Just a quick scan, and now it's every place. Rentals, friends' houses when I stay over, even Winnie's. I call Winnie more often now. We used to just text, now I call. I need to hear her voice, to know she's present. I tell myself it's because I missed her, but I think it's because she's the one person who never questions what I say. She just listens. Last week, she asked me if I was sleeping okay. I told her about the checking. She didn't laugh. She just said, "You always were a careful one." And then she told me about her grandfather, Hal, and how he used to check every outlet in a new house before he'd let anyone plug anything in. A habit from the war, she said. Maybe it's like that. Maybe it's a family thing. But how long have they been watching? I still remember the chipped formica of that table, a pale yellow with little flecks of brown showing through. We'd stopped at a rest area somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I was eating a dry sandwich I'd packed for the drive. I was heading west to see my parents, a long trip I hadn't made in years, trying to sort out some things in my life. It was a strangely quiet place, mostly just long-haul truckers and families passing through. The coffee was surprisingly good for rest stop coffee, weak but hot. I finished it, crumpled the cup, and tossed it. That's when I noticed him again. The older man, Harvey, I think his name was. I'd seen it on a faded baseball cap he was wearing. He was standing by my car, just looking at it. Not leaning, not inspecting the tires, just standing there. And he turned his head, looked directly at me a split second before I even thought about looking back. It was probably just coincidence. People make eye contact, but it felt deliberate, like he was waiting for me to notice. I unlocked the car, and as I reached for the door handle, he shifted his weight, anticipating the movement. It wasn't a big shift, just a little readjustment, but it was enough. I paused, hand hovering. He smiled, a small, tight thing. "Long drive?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound normal. "Chicago to Denver." "Rough stretch," he said, then added, before I'd even formulated the thought in my head to ask, "Lots of wind this time of year." I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I noticed." I got in the car, started the engine. He didn't seem surprised. It was like he already knew I was going to drive. He waved as I pulled out. Honestly, I figured he was just a lonely guy, a bit of a people watcher. Maybe a retired cop, observing everything. I felt bad for him, actually. It was a little creepy, sure, but not threatening, just unsettling. I tried to put it out of my mind, focus on the road. But I kept checking the rearview mirror. He was still there, watching me go. Even from that distance, it felt like he was already knowing where I was going next. I drove for another hour, maybe more, just trying to put miles between me and that rest stop. I took the next exit even though it added time, just to get off the interstate. Small town, Beauregard, Louisiana. It looked tired. I found a motel. Nothing fancy, but clean. I figured I'd get a decent night's sleep and reassess in the morning. I was unloading the car when I saw her, an older woman, Vera, watering flowers outside the office. She looked up and she smiled. Not a friendly smile, more like she already knew me, and then she said, "Rough day on the road, dear. Harvey sent me to check on you." Harvey. My blood just stopped. How could she know? It wasn't like I'd told anyone about him. I stammered something about being fine, just tired. She kept watering those petunias, but her eyes didn't leave mine. "He worries, about travelers, just wants to make sure everyone's all right." It was weird, but maybe Harvey was some kind of unofficial highway guardian angel, some retired social worker who just liked checking on people. It was a stretch, I know, but it felt better than the alternative. I went inside and bolted the door. I tried to eat something, but my stomach was twisted. Later, I drove to a diner a few miles out of town, hoping to blend in. I sat in a booth and ordered coffee, and there he was. Not Harvey, but Glenn, the trucker I'd seen at the rest stop. He wasn't looking at me exactly. He was looking past me, towards the parking lot. but he kept glancing my way, like he was confirming something, like he was expecting me to be there. That's when the angel theory completely fell apart. This wasn't about helping people. This was something else, something organized. I sat with the coffee getting cold, watching Glenn. He wasn't eating, just scanning. Every car that pulled in, every person who walked by the window, it felt like he was looking for something or someone, and I was starting to feel like whatever he was looking for, he'd already found it. I finished the coffee and decided I needed to get out of there. Beauregard was getting under my skin. I drove back to the motel but didn't go inside. I just parked across the street and watched. Vera's little blue car was still there, and another one, a faded green pickup I hadn't seen before, parked halfway down the block. It just sat there, empty. I started thinking about Harvey. Maybe he wasn't some concerned citizen. Maybe he was security for Vera. For whatever was going on here, maybe she ran some kind of retreat, a place people came to get fixed, and Harvey was making sure the guests stayed put. Then I saw Elma, Vera's friend from the lobby. She was walking towards the green pickup. She wasn't getting in, though she was tucking something under the tire, a small package wrapped in brown paper. I couldn't see what it was, but it looked heavy, and she kept looking around like she was worried about being seen. That's when the pickup started. It pulled out fast, almost hitting a parked car, and then I saw him, Harvey, behind the wheel. He didn't look at me. He didn't even seem to notice me. He just drove, and Elma was still standing on the sidewalk watching him go. I started the car and threw it in gear. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to leave. Now, I floored it, heading north, not even bothering to check the rearview mirror. I didn't think they'd follow, not yet. I drove for what felt like hours, just trying to put distance between myself and that town. Every time I saw a pickup truck, I'd instinctively swerve. Stupid, I know, but I couldn't shake the image of Harvey's face or Elma just watching. I finally stopped at a diner 50 miles up the highway. I needed coffee, I needed to think, and I needed to call someone. I found a number for the local sheriff in the county seat. Her name was Sheriff Bia. She listened to my story, which sounded even crazier when I said it out loud. It was about Harvey, Elma, the package, the feeling of being watched. She was polite, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. She said she'd look into it, but honestly, I didn't get the impression she took me seriously. "We don't get much trouble out that way," she said, finally. "Mostly just folks passing through." She did offer to run the names, though. Harvey and Elma. It took a while, and she came back with something. Harvey Maddox. He had a record. It was minor stuff, mostly public disturbance, a couple of traffic violations. But then she said Elma's last name, Elma Vera, and that's when it hit me. Vera, that was the name on the pamphlets in the motel room. The therapy pamphlets. Reclaim your inner peace. It was a scam, a staged wellness retreat, preying on travelers. That had to be it. They lure you in with the promise of relaxation. Then what? Rob you? Something worse, it made the whole thing feel smaller, understandable even. I felt a flicker of relief. But then Bia said something else. Elma Vera, she's a psychologist. She runs a clinic 30 miles from that motel. She's been practicing for 20 years. She is highly respected in the community. Highly respected. And Harvey Maddox was working for her. It didn't fit. It didn't make any sense. And the way she said her name, Vera, it wasn't like she was just reading a file. It was like she knew her. It's been years. I still drive differently. Not in a big way. Not like I'm expecting someone to be there, but I check my mirrors more. And if someone offers me help, even just holding a door, I catalog everything. Their shoes, the way they smell, if their hands shake. It's automatic. I tried to go back, not to the diner, not to that stretch of highway, just back through the records. Sheriff Bia had been good enough to give me her card, and I called her a few months later, trying to get more on Elma and Harvey. Bia was tight-lipped. She said everything was handled, closed cases. Harvey had a record, petty stuff. But Elma, clean as a whistle, she was a pillar of the community. I convinced myself, for a long time, it was a really elaborate, twisted scam. Harvey was just muscle for Elma, preying on people who looked lost. She was some kind of predatory therapist, draining people dry emotionally and financially. It fit the wellness retreat angle, it fit the way she talked, all calm and assessing. But then I remembered Alton, the guy at the diner who kept glancing over. He hadn't said a word to me, just watched. And B hadn't seemed surprised to hear about Harvey working for Elma. More like she'd been expecting something. I was at a grocery store last week, waiting in line. An older woman, Flora, offered me a cough drop, just like that, a little paper packet. I took it, said thank you, and then I was running through the checklist. Brown shoes, floral perfume, a slight tremor in her hand. Nothing, absolutely nothing, but for a moment, just a flash, I thought of Elma, and I wondered, did Flora know Elma? Did anyone know what was really going on? The scent of jasmine always throws me back. I passed a garden with it blooming yesterday, and suddenly I was right back there. It was the autumn after I'd moved, trying to get settled into a small apartment in a really old building. Everything felt off kilter, and I hadn't made any connections yet when the woman next door offered a hand with boxes. She mentioned casually that she was a counselor. I took her up on it, and then on her invitation for tea. The chipped mug warmed my hands. I was getting used to the quiet mornings, the way the light hit the fire escape outside my kitchen window. It wasn't cheerful, exactly, more like honest. I had been making a point of walking to the bakery on Bleecker Street every day, just for a croissant and to force some human interaction. Small talk with old man Yates, mostly. He always asked about the weather, even when it was obviously raining. I was sorting mail, bills mostly, when I heard a knock. It wasn't a sharp rap, but a soft, almost hesitant one. It was Cleo, of course. She was holding a small plant, something trailing with dark green leaves. "Thought you might like this," she said, smiling. "A spider plant. Very resilient, like you seem to be." That was odd. I hadn't mentioned anything about needing a plant, or, well, anything about my resilience. I'd barely spoken to her beyond polite greetings. "Oh, that's very thoughtful," I managed. "It needs indirect sunlight. And not too much water. I remembered you saying you have north-facing windows." I distinctly remember thinking about north-facing windows, wondering if I'd be able to grow anything at all. I hadn't said a word. I'd barely unpacked the boxes in the living room, let alone discussed my horticultural anxieties with a near stranger. "How did you?" I started, then stopped. It was probably just a lucky guess. Old buildings, similar layouts. She was a counselor, after all. Maybe she just had a knack for reading people. I was overthinking it. "It's nothing," she said quickly, a little too quickly. "Just observant, I suppose. I'm starting a new group therapy session next week, focused on transitions, moving, starting new jobs. You might find it helpful." The timing was what was getting to me. The plant, the comment about resilience, the therapy group all offered at once. It was efficient, like she'd been compiling a profile of me. I started taking the long way around to avoid running into Cleo. Not a dramatically long way, just different hallways. The elevator was out of the question. Too confined, too predictable. I told myself it was just a coincidence, all the little things. The plant, the group invite, her knowing about my grandfather. But the hallway thing felt deliberate, like she was testing something. Yesterday, I tried calling my sister Rand, just to talk, to hear a normal voice. The line was dead, no dial tone. I figured it was a temporary outage, which happens all the time in this old building. Then I tried texting, sent a couple, "Hey, everything okay?" Nothing. No delivery confirmation, nothing. I walked down to the lobby to check with the superwalt. He wasn't there. Just an empty chair and a half-eaten sandwich on the desk. That's when I noticed it. The flyer, taped to the corkboard, right next to the notices for lost cats and yoga classes. A handwritten note, simple black ink on yellow paper. Group meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Price's apartment. Bring a small object representing a fear. Price? I hadn't heard anyone mention a price. In the wording, it wasn't Cleo's neat script. It was messier, more frantic. I walked back to my apartment and checked the security camera footage from the hall. The building installed them last year. The feed cut out at precisely 6:17 p.m. Just static. Every camera. All of them. It had to be the storm, right? A power surge, but the lights hadn't flickered. Nothing else had gone out. I kept replaying the last few seconds of clear footage, hoping to see something. Anything. A technician, a shadow, and then I saw it. A figure moving quickly, exiting the stairwell. They were wearing a hooded sweatshirt, face obscured, but they were carrying a spider plant, exactly like mine. I rewound the footage again, focusing on the figure's gait. It wasn't a limp exactly, more like a hesitation with each step. Something about the way they held the plant too, almost protectively, like it was fragile or important. I tried to enhance the image, but the quality was too poor, just a blur of dark clothing and green leaves. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, like I was being watched even now. Then the intercom buzzed. It hadn't worked in weeks. Samet? It was Cleo, her voice unnervingly calm. Just checking in. You seemed a little distressed earlier. Is everything all right? Distressed? She knew. She knew I'd been looking at the footage. And how? I hadn't told anyone. Just a power flicker, I said, trying to sound casual. Everything's fine. Of course. Just wanted to offer support. Remember we talked about grounding techniques? It felt like a trap. She was always offering support too readily. Too knowing, I hung up. I needed to get out, even just for a little while, to clear my head. I went down to the lobby, intending to walk to the corner store. The front door was unlocked. Walt always kept it locked, always, and the security camera above it was angled upwards, pointed at the ceiling. I stepped outside and nearly collided with Price. He was leaning against the building, smoking. He looked expectant. "Heard about the cameras," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Bad luck. Someone's messing with the system." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "They don't like people looking." Before I could ask what he meant, a car screeched around the corner, headlights blinding. It wasn't slowing down. It aimed directly for the sidewalk where I'd been standing just seconds before. Price shoved me into the doorway, and the car swerved, narrowly missing us both, and sped away. I was shaking. It had to be an accident. A reckless driver. But Price was looking at me, a strange expression on his face. It wasn't relief. It was assessment. My legs were still trembling when Price walked me back towards the building. He didn't say much, just kept glancing at me with that same look. It wasn't concern, not exactly, more like studying a specimen. I kept replaying the car, the way it came out of nowhere. It had to be a mistake, but why would Price look like he was expecting it? I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't think I was losing it. I went straight to Samet. He's the building manager and always seems to have a handle on everything. I told him about the car, about Price's reaction, and about feeling like I was being watched. I even mentioned the intercom buzzing when no one was calling, and the camera angle. Samet listened, nodding slowly. He said he'd check the security footage to see if anything showed up. He seemed less concerned than I expected. He said Price was a good guy, a little eccentric maybe, but harmless. He offered to walk me to my apartment, which I accepted. When we got to my floor, Samet stopped. "I just checked the logs," he said, his voice quiet. "Someone disabled the exterior cameras for 15 minutes this afternoon, right around the time you were walking back from the store." My stomach dropped. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. Someone had known I'd be out. Someone had deliberately created an opportunity. I started to think maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe Price and whoever messed with the cameras were working together, setting something up for someone else. Someone important. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Samet handed me a keycard. "I'm going to review all the footage. Lock your door, okay?" I did, feeling a little better. At least Samet was taking it seriously. Then I noticed it. A small white envelope slid under my door. There was no stamp and no return address, just my name typed. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken today, standing outside the store. The angle wasn't from the building cameras. It was from across the street, and in the background, barely visible, was a figure I'd seen before, watching. It wasn't a break-in, not exactly. Nothing was stolen, just moved. My books rearranged on the shelf, a picture frame tilted at a different angle. Small things I would have noticed immediately. I called Samit, of course. He came over, looked around, and said it was probably just me being stressed. He suggested I talk to Yates again. I hadn't. Not after our last session. Something about the way she listened, the way she knew things. It wasn't the usual therapist stuff, digging into childhood. She'd ask about Rand, who I hadn't spoken to in years, or mention a detail about my old apartment, things I hadn't volunteered. It felt like she was fishing, but for what? I started avoiding the hallways. I took the stairs 2 at a time, just to get through them quickly, and I noticed other people doing it too. Quick glances, darting eyes. It was like we were all on edge. I thought maybe it was Price. He always seemed to be around, leaned against the mailboxes, watching. I'd dismissed it before as just him being a weirdo, but now it felt different, like he was cataloging everyone's movements. It made a sick kind of sense. Price was the eyes, Yates was the mind. They were coordinating something. I stopped going to the diner alone. Even walking to the corner store felt exposed. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was letting it get to me. But I started checking my rearview mirror constantly, scanning the faces in the crowd. Now, I always check the back window of my car before I get in. Every time. Just a quick glance. It's automatic. I don't even think about it anymore. I'm at the library now, waiting for Ines. The large windows facing the parking lot, they make my chest tight. I keep looking, just looking.